2024 has been a crazy college football season, and it is not quite over yet. There were many big-time players who came out of nowhere, and there were also plenty of freshmen who stepped up right away. Honestly, I think this was the best freshman wide receiver class we have ever seen in college football. The top end of this year's wide receiver freshman class was truly crazy, as we had generational talents in Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, and guys like Cam Coleman, TJ Moore, Ryan Wingo, and even Bryant Wesco all looked like future stars. There are obviously even more names of guys who were good as freshmen, and in today's video, I want to go through and talk about this insane 2024 freshman class and how they did throughout their first season in college. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about this insane wide receiver class. Before we talk about some crazy freshman wide receivers, be sure to go down to the comment section and drop a future video suggestion down below, and the best topic will get a video next week. I'm going to be doing this a lot more on the channel to get us through the offseason, so be sure to drop your most clever or unique video topic down below. Okay, so there are 8 different guys I want to highlight from the 2024 freshman wide receiver class, and I've broke it down into 3 different classes. Guys who I think are going to be future stars and could potentially be first round draft picks, guys who have superstar potential, and then guys who are somewhat generational. We're first going to start out with the future stars. Coach Prime has done a terrific job recruiting, but one guy he got in the 2024 class was a kid by the name of Draylon Miller. Coming out of Silsbee High School, Miller was one of the top players in the state of Texas, as for his career, he had caught 155 passes for 3,571 yards and 43 touchdowns. Miller also averaged 23 yards per reception and 84 yards per catch, and 85 yards per game, and he also nearly ran for 1,000 yards during his high school career. Miller was the number 17 wide receiver in the class of 2024 and a top 100 recruit, but he would decide to commit to Colorado and play for Coach Prime. This year, despite being the 4th string wide receiver, Miller ended up having really good stats, as he caught a total of 32 passes for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns, while averaging nearly 9 yards per catch. He had a couple of really good outings, including games against both Kansas and Utah, as in that Utah game, he had 6 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown, and against KU, he had 5 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown. With the Buffalo's main weapons all graduating or going off to the draft, Draylon Miller could be a guy who could break out in 2025 and become a household name in the Big 12 and the next big thing for the Buffs. He was super impressive in my eyes. The next guy I want to highlight is Mario Craver Jr. Coming out of Clay Chalkville High School in Birmingham, Alabama, Craver was also a pretty big deal, as he had over 1,000 yards his senior year and 15 total touchdowns. He also, back in 2021, helped his team go undefeated with a state championship, and because of all this, Craver was listed as one of the top receiver recruits in the class of 2024. He was the number 42 overall receiver in the class and decided to go over to Mississippi State. The 4-star Craver hoped to get on the field immediately, and that's exactly what would end up happening. Despite battling some off-the-field stuff, Craver would end up appearing in 8 total games, and he caught 17 passes for 368 yards and 3 total touchdowns. His best performance came against Texas A&M, in which he had 5 catches for 42 yards and a score, and he would decide to enter the transfer portal. Craver was listed as the number 40 overall transfer and the number 13 wideout, and has since decided to commit to Texas A&M, and he should be a big-time weapon for quarterback Marcel Reed in 2025, and I definitely think he has a lot of potential. Our last guy in the future stars tier is going to be Bryant Wesco Jr. Coming out of Midlothian High School in Texas, Wesco had a pretty crazy high school career. He caught 109 career passes for 1,903 yards and 29 touchdowns. He was also one of the best track runners in the state, and because of that, Wesco actually became a 5-star recruit in the class of 2024. At least that sort of depended on the site. 24/7 Sports listed him as the number 11 receiver, but other sites had him as a 5-star. Wesco did not seem to care when he got to campus though, as in his freshman season, he went crazy. He ended up catching 41 passes for 708 yards and 5 touchdowns, with his most notable game coming in the first round of the college football playoff. Against SMU, Wesco caught 8 passes for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he also had 3 catches in their loss against Texas. Games against both Louisville and Stanford were also awesome, and Wesco showed that he had a ton of potential and should be a star in college football here soon. Going into our future superstar potential, guys, let's first talk about Ryan Wingo from Texas. Coming from a football-loving family, Wingo was the absolute best of the bunch, as while going to St. Louis University High School, he put up big numbers. He ended up finishing with a total of 129 catches for 2,160 yards and 31 receiving touchdowns. Because of that, he was wanted by every school in the country, and it seemingly came down to Mizzou and Texas. Wingo would ultimately choose the Longhorns, and he had a spectacular freshman year. Despite being in a logjam of receivers, Wingo would finish with 28 catches for 450 yards and 2 touchdowns, while averaging 16.1 yards per catch. He never had one of those games that makes you go absolutely wow, but he was extremely consistent for a guy who was a freshman and stuck in a loaded wide receiver core. Wingo is a tremendous athlete who I think will get an opportunity to take off next year, with both Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, and their tight end all leaving for the NFL. He's also still playing in the playoff. Wingo's a guy who I'm super pumped to watch in the future. We now get an opportunity to talk about a second Clemson Tiger, and that is TJ Moore. TJ Moore ended up becoming the 4th overall receiver in the class of 2024 after coming out of Tampa Catholic High School. Moore has been a crazy athlete for quite some time now, and before he ended up getting to Clemson, he finished with a total of 92 catches for 2,993 yards and 30 touchdowns across just his junior and senior seasons. His father was a star football player back in the day, but Wesco was a 5-star. He arrived at Clemson alongside Bryant Wesco, but Moore ended up having the better season. Moore finished with a total of 45 catches for 651 yards and 5 total touchdowns. His best game came against Texas, as against the Longhorns, he caught 9 passes for 116 yards and a touchdown. And like Wingo, he was just remarkably consistent and showed incredible potential at times. Honestly, I think TJ Moore will become the top wideout for Clemson in the next 2 years and should be a first-round pick and has an opportunity to dazzle college football. In our group of guys who could potentially be superstars, the final one to talk about is Cam Coleman. Coming out of Phoenix City, Alabama, Cam Coleman would go to Central High School and was a top 5 player in the class of 2024. He was the number 2 receiver behind Jeremiah Smith, and this was for good reason. Cam Coleman was extremely explosive, as he ended up catching 61 passes for 1,372 yards and 18 touchdowns while he was a senior. He was coached by Bo Nix's dad, which is also kind of intriguing. He ended up deciding to enroll at Auburn, where this year with the Tigers, he caught 37 passes for 598 yards and 8 touchdowns. Coleman did all this while he was a true freshman and while playing in an inept offense. He wasn't even the main target either, but he had a couple of brilliant games, which all came towards the back half of the season. Coleman had 8 catches for 100 yards and 3 touchdowns against UL Monroe, 7 catches for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns against number 15 Texas A&M, and then 7 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown on the road against Alabama in the Iron Bowl. Coleman was tremendous all year long, and he's a guy who I think next year will take over as wide receiver 1 for them and could be an absolute superstar for the Tigers and a joy for college football fans to watch. Okay, so now we get to the generational category of players, and the first guy we need to talk about is Jeremiah Smith. This guy might have been the best freshman wide receiver we have ever seen in some people's eyes, and some people are already trying to talk about how eligibility restraint should not be in the draft, and that Jeremiah Smith should be eligible right away. I know that's kind of crazy to think, but some think he'd be a top 5 pick if he went in this year's draft class as just an 18-year-old. Smith would end up coming out of Chaminade Madonna Prep in Miami Gardens, Florida, and he had been putting up big-time numbers for years. As a senior, he caught 88 passes for 1,300 yards and 19 touchdowns, was named the Player of the Year in the state of Florida, was in some sites the top overall player in high school football, and due to his insane athleticism and maturity, he was listed as the number 1 overall recruit in the class of 2024. Smith decided to go over to Ohio State, where in his freshman year, he wasted absolutely no time. Smith would finish with 70 catches for 1,224 yards and 14 touchdowns. He's had a couple of incredible performances, but when the stakes were at its highest, he played his best football. Against number 3 Oregon in October, he caught 9 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown. Against number 9 Tennessee in the playoff, he caught 6 passes for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then just a couple of days ago, against number 1 Oregon in the playoff, he caught 7 passes for 187 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was consistent in pretty much each and every single game and caught a touchdown in all but 3 appearances. Smith is arguably the best freshman wide receiver we have ever seen in college football history, and he's only going to continue to get better. I mean, with Marvin Harrison, we saw him break out as a redshirt freshman, and Smith still has at least 2 more years. Hopefully he doesn't get hurt, but maybe we could see some sort of eligibility change, and maybe all that stuff gets done away with because of how good Jeremiah is. I'm sure he'll be getting a huge payday, and Ohio State fans are lucky to have him, and he could still be going off and helping them win a national championship over the next couple of weeks. Alrighty, so our last guy who is in the generational category is Ryan Williams. Also, I think Smith is definitely better than him, but this was just the order I decided to put him in. Ryan Williams had an incredible year for the Alabama Crimson Tide, and this was to be expected. He was the number 8 recruit in the country and the 3rd overall wideout, and coming out of Saraland High School in Alabama, he was always expected to be insane. He's one of the youngest players in his class, but that did not stop him as he ended up catching 72 passes for 1,324 yards and 19 touchdowns. He was the first ever sophomore to be named Mr. Football in the state of Alabama, and the guy just put up incredible numbers throughout his entire high school career and was also an insane athlete. Because of that, he decided to choose Alabama over Auburn, Florida State, Georgia, and Texas, and as a true freshman, he had many brilliant moments. Williams caught a total of 48 passes for 865 yards and 8 touchdowns, but in particular was dominant against number 2 Georgia, as in that game he had 6 catches for 177 yards and a touchdown, including that crazy go-ahead score. He also had 8 catches for 73 yards in a game against number 11 Tennessee, and also had 139 yards and 2 touchdowns against Western Kentucky. Williams may not have been as dominant as Smith, but he showed pretty much just as much potential. He'll be fed the ball a lot in 2025, and I cannot wait to see his ceiling and how much better he can become. So yeah, today we talked about what in my opinion was one of the best freshman wide receiver classes in college football history, as we had a couple of generational guys in Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, some guys with superstar potential, and some guys who I already think will be future stars. There are probably plenty of freshmen throughout college football who showed a lot of promise, or maybe even had similar or better stats than some of these guys, but if I missed someone, please be sure to let me know down below so I can make a part 2. I'd absolutely love to do that, and if I should do this for other positions or other years, let me know. Also, before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.